Welcome to episode 2 of Moments That Make a Life. I'm Camille,
I'm Simon.
and this episode is going to cover a bit about therapy, isn't it, Simon?
Yeah, so when we talked in episode 1, you talked about how you were a lawyer and you've retrained over the past few years to be a therapist. And part of that was you said, if I hadn't have had therapy myself, I wouldn't have retrained as a therapist. So just on that, how did that come about and what took you to therapy?
Yeah, and I think that's really, I think a really important part of the story, isn't it? Because I was 43, so it was like 5 years ago now. And I literally was like looking through counselling directory, and I was drinking too much, wasn't I, really? I was drinking. We'd both been drinking a fair bit. We'd had the kids, they were, getting older. And I think, drink became a bit of an issue for me. And I was thinking, I need to just stop drinking. And do you remember that Monday when I was going to go to Friday without a drink? And I just talked about alcohol all day, didn't I?
All down the beach.
Yeah, it was like, because I knew I couldn't have alcohol that night. I was just talking about it all the time. So I thought maybe I need a bit of help with this. So I was going through counselling directory and I was trying to find a therapist, and I was saying, don't know which ones I want. And that's how it all happened, really, wasn't it?
Yeah, so that's your sort of starting point. I might look into therapy because of drinking as an issue. Did you have anything in mind as to what it be? It's going to be 6 weeks. I just need to talk to someone, get it out there, or what did you think it would be?
I honestly didn't know, and I think that was the point. I thought I just need a bit of help with drinking, and literally I thought I was smashing life, if I'm honest. I thought, I'm working, I've got the kids, I'm married, I'm all right. I just need a bit of help with drinking. And when I went to therapy for that first session, I didn't even know what type it was. I didn't know what he was going to talk about, and it just went from there, didn't it? It was just, years of it then.
There's a sort of, I don't know if it's true or not, sort of a perception sometimes with therapy that you might go for something and end up 6 or 7 sessions down the line, the therapist saying, actually, this is the real reason we're here, and it might not be that. Did you have that, or was it the same?
Oh, massively, massively. I went over drinking, and then the first 10 sessions were about my mum, and I was literally heartbroken every week, and I thought, where did my childhood come into this? So I didn't talk about drink. I said that to you, like I was still drinking, and he never ever used to ask me about how my drinking plans go, and I was so glad, because at that point I was still drinking at weekends and stuff for quite a while, and he didn't ever mention drink.
And was there a plan with it when you went, as in from the therapist? Did you get something that sort of seemed a magic wand that, right, you are here, I know what it is, and I'm going to do this over the next 3 sessions? Or how did that work out into sort of going into therapy and relaxing into it?
Awful. Like, I literally went in and I was acting like we were partners. And, I'd spent my whole life being like a lawyer, sitting with people in their trauma, listening to, child protection work's pretty intense. And I never, ever told anybody how I felt or what I was feeling. So to suddenly be in that spotlight where it was all eyes on me and I had to say what I felt, I was horrific. I kept trying to change the dynamic. I didn't really want to talk about me. I'd go in joking. It was awful, awful.
So was some of that, I'll tell you a little bit about me, you then respond?
Oh, massively.
Call and answer with your therapist?
Yeah, massively. And we argued a lot. The first year was like I wasn't really into it and divulged, and I was very much going in, acting like I used to think of things, funny things to tell him from the week. And I'd go in with my funny story, and then he'd just like, I'm just going to say bollock me, but that's what I felt like happened every week. We'd sort of have this routine of I'd go in with a story of funniness, he didn't react, and we'd go loop it round for ages.
Do you think that was because you'd gone in with one sort of reason for therapy and perhaps the therapist was taking you somewhere else? Or do you think there was a resistance on your part that you were sort of trying to not necessarily avoid, but sort of avoid the reason why you were there?
And I think that's the same with everyone. And I think that's why it's really important to have those conversations about therapy, because you actually don't realise how damaged you are sometimes. Like, I thought some of the defence mechanisms that I used were amazing. I used to think I was smashing life, and I would black and white think with people a lot of the time. If someone upset me, I'd cut them off, and I thought that was amazing. So when that was pointed out that that's actually getting in my own way, I was like, well, I'm smashing this. And I feel like that took a lot of time to understand that that's actually part of my problem.
And on that sort of, very often what I thought with therapy, before I'd seen it with you, is sometimes say there was a physical ailment and they said, here's your antibiotics, you've got to take these for 2 weeks, take every one, and it's 2 weeks, and there's on the label how long it's going to be. But and I thought therapy would be the same. You know, the therapist would say on day one, but I've done a triage with you, and it's going to be 6 weeks. But from what you're talking about as how that worked out, it was had to be a little bit more open ended. How does that feel, that not getting a definitive answer as how long something's going to take as to how you're going to get to the end?
Yeah, well, again, I think it became in stages for mine. So I think, like, obviously there was that feeling that I was doing work. I stopped drinking, like, after 9 months, and I've not drank for 4.5 years now. So on the drinking side, it massively dealt with that very, very early on. And then in the, like, summer after I'd stopped drinking in the April, I just sent him a text message and said, I think I'm done now. I've smashed it. I'm not drinking. Things are going really well. And then we sort of worked to the end. And then in that session, when we were working to the end, he basically said, you know, it feels really rushed. It feels like you know, you're not quite finished. And what I then realised was he was going on holiday and having like a 4 week break, not 4 months. And I was sort of melting in that environment of the thought of not seeing him for 4 weeks. So I was leaving therapy. And then we decided to explore the gap. And then when I went back after that, that was when all my attachment issues to him and my vulnerability and the work happened. So that first year, I thought I'd done it, I'd worked it all out. And it was then the 2 years after that that the proper work was done and the changes happened. And that was a shock.
So just on that, the reason you thought you'd gone
Yeah.
took 9 months,
Yeah.
and you didn't know it was going to take 9 months when you went. And again, was the you sort of talk about two things. Was part of it that I've achieved what I was supposed to be doing, but also that again, perhaps from the therapist rather than you, knew that there was more to be dealing with, and there was something that you weren't aware of, which was attachment.
Yeah.
Is that basically it?
Massively. Yeah, massively.
And how did that come about for you? That realization.
I think I'd prided myself my whole life. I mean, we've been together since I was 21. So, my whole adult life I've been with you. But I prided myself that I could just like cut people off. I wasn't getting too attached. And, we'd laugh, but you'd always say your heart 1 foot out if anything happened. So I always had this standoffishness about me that I didn't need to get attached to anyone. And that was always how I operated. So then when I was in therapy and I became sort of fixated and in that kind of loop of needing to see him, being dependent on him, I didn't like that at all. I could not stand that I needed him and he didn't need me, and that he was helping me and I didn't help him. That caused so many problems for me because I would say I went to a sort of teenage kind of zone in therapy, and I didn't see that coming at all, and I hated it.
So again, when you had that call and answer idea at first going to therapy, I'll tell you a bit about me, you tell me something back, and you don't get that.
Yeah.
When you're getting into the deeper feelings about, actually, I really, really need this, it might seem really exaggerated almost. And the therapist isn't.
Not bothered.
Not that they're not bothered, but that they're not responding in the same way as you do.
Yeah.
How did you cope with that?
I didn't. I didn't. I didn't. I didn't cope with that at all because it went against everything that I'd built my whole life to be, that I didn't need anyone at all, which feels counterproductive because obviously, we've been very together for years and, I wouldn't be afraid of needing you, but I didn't feel like, I didn't understand that I needed him and he didn't need me. I couldn't stand it. Like, it felt really, really difficult and got in the way of the therapy quite a lot.
Another thing in that therapeutic time with the obviously, as I say, you might go saying I'm going for this, and then you've got into that zone of attachment becoming a big thing you're dealing with. Life comes along as well, doesn't it? Because life's going
Yeah.
alongside this. So sometimes other events can affect the therapy, come into the therapy? Can you think of a situation whereby you're dealing with that attachment issue on a big basis, but then life, as I say,
Yeah,
gets in the way, and that has to come in, and then the therapist again has to adjust and
yeah.
bring something else to it.
Yeah, definitely. So I think I was 2 years into therapy at the time, and I'd started the masters. So I started a masters in psychology as a result of the therapy, which I touched upon last time, which felt a little bit embarrassing when he'd, said what you're doing your masters in. But it felt like I was going towards the path I needed to. And I specifically remember around that time, I was very much, for the first time in my whole life, not catastrophizing. So I used to spend a lot of time worrying about, really, I used to think if I worried about serious things happening, that they wouldn't happen. So like my background was, my dad was like a drug addict and mentally ill for my whole life. My sister was very disabled and things, and my mum was difficult, is one way of putting it. So I felt a lot of my life I was waiting for a catastrophe. And for the first time ever, I was really enjoying life. So I was at uni a couple of days a week. I was working part-time in a solicitor's. The kids were like 15 and 16, and I felt I wasn't worrying, and I was looking present for the first time. And then we went, didn't we? So we went to Paris, not Paris, was it? Nice. Why did I say Paris then? We went to Nice with the kids, and Matteo, so that's our eldest son, Matteo, was 16 at the time. And he literally started getting a shoulder pain, didn't he? And he was like not well. But in the past, like I was very seriously ill in my 20s, and I'd, ended up in hospital for a while and ended up having a hip replacement. And Matteo, a few years before that, I got ill, and I decided he needed a hip replacement. So I got myself in a state about him being ill. And he was fine in the end, wasn't he? So back then I was like, I'm just going to back off, and I'm not going to get myself stressed if they're not well. So I remember I was quite present, and I was fine. And Matteo was, you know, had this pain, and looking back, he had a look in his face that didn't look really well. We came back from holiday, and then, to cut a long story short, on the Saturday I took him into A&E, and he basically got admitted into intensive care, didn't he, that day? And they basically said, he's seriously ill, and he's potentially got 24 hours to live. And he was 16 at the time, and it was Southport A&E that we took him to. But he had sepsis, didn't he, and pneumococcal pneumonia, and his kidneys and lungs had shut down. But, oh, that's sad. Yeah, but I remember thinking, well, two things really. I remember thinking, for the first time, I'm not being worried, and something really big's happened. And then I also remember thinking, I can be present for it now, because I'd done 2 years of therapy. Sorry, I didn't expect that to get me so much. Yeah, I remember sitting there with him, and I could really just be there in the moment. On the Saturday itself, they said he's at serious risk of a cardiac arrest. They didn't know what fully was wrong with him on the Saturday, but they said he's really critically ill. His organs, his kidneys, and his lungs had shut down. And then by the Sunday, they'd said it was pneumococcal pneumonia and sepsis, so we knew what was wrong with him then. But he was very, very seriously sick. They actually even said, didn't they, he's the sickest person here. And it's going to be a rough few days. And it was. It was absolutely awful. And, when he was in intensive care for 16 days, wasn't he, in the end? And then a week in Broad Green, getting his lung cleared out. But in the moment that he was in hospital, I remember very vividly thinking, I can sit with this. Like, I felt like I knew I could cope with, being with him in that. So I felt like I was there for him. And, obviously we did a lot of things together, didn't we, as well? But in that moment, I didn't speak to anybody, did I? So I think sort of my coping mechanisms were that you were dealing with everybody we knew, and I was just speaking to you. But I did message my therapist, and he let me message him, and he wanted to keep update with what was happening for Matthew, and I think that built a lot of the relationship and the trust for me going forward. But it feels like, looking back, that therapy prepared me to be present in a really catastrophic, like the worst thing I've ever been through. And I actually remember, like, the Sunday when, like, he'd gone in on the Saturday, and he basically, I literally just woke up and I was like, is this for real? And it was really, like, scary. But I remember feeling every emotion and staying with it and thinking, I can be present for the first time.
So that, I mean, obviously there's a physical presence. You could be physically present at the hospital,
Yeah.
but a difference that you saw in that thing of being mentally present.
Yeah, massively. I felt mentally present. And as I said earlier, I'd had a lot of, like, my dad's mental illness was manifested itself in, he'd go to London for days, the police would call around, the house, he'd kick the door in. There was a lot of instability and a lot of fear around, like, traumatic events. And looking back, how I would deal with them would be sort of not dissociated, but I'd go into a zone of being able to cope in a catastrophe, but I wasn't present in the catastrophe really. Whereas since 2 years of therapy, I felt like that prepared me to be present for Matteo in that pain rather than just be physically present. And I said it to you, and you probably said it as well, but there were so many wonderful moments in intensive care.
Yeah, there was. The staff
Yeah,
and
yeah,
each other and Matteo
yeah,
reaction was
yeah.
all
And
wired up, but still.
but like, and like, I want on, like, the first night, like, I had to hold his hand all night, and I was all, like, twisted round on the chair and that. But there was so much emotional connection, and I think when you've got teenage sons as well, like, part of having teenage sons is that they probably get, well, I hope it wasn't just me, but they get in a phase where the mum is probably the last person they want to speak to, and it felt like, there was a connection back, so it brought us closer together. So I think that's, a couple of things really, that it was one of the worst experiences of my life. And I remember I also knew that if he hadn't have survived, because he's absolutely fine now, he's touch wood, got nothing long lasting, but I knew I would never be the same again. Like, I knew that if anything, like, if he'd have died, that would have been if. So I feel like the moment was massive in the sense that I was present, I was properly present, and it ended well. And therapy helped me with that massively.
And within that, you talked about your therapist kept in touch and allowed you
Yeah.
to be in touch with the therapist. But it wasn't, again, there's this sometimes perception that a therapist saves you.
Yeah.
That the life ring goes into the sea and you can cling on. But it wasn't that, was it? It was something else. How did it feel? And is that a myth about the rescuing?
It's a massive, massive myth. And I think, that's the danger, that you want that. So I always wanted my therapist to think I was amazing, to think I was great, to think I was his best patient ever. I wanted him to think I was brilliant. And so much of his job was stopping that. So we argued a lot because that wasn't the cause of it. I've said it lots of times, but if I didn't have such a strong therapist, I'd have run rings round him, I think, because being a lawyer, being that kind of personality, I would have been able to sort of engineer that I'd do it my way. So I'm not really going to talk about my emotions. I'm not really going to do any work. I'm going to come in and have a laugh. And there were so many occasions where it sounds like a joke, but it wasn't. Like, I once went in and I told him a story about baking a cake, I think, and I'd said, I just cocked it up and everything else, and he just stared at me and basically said, "You're not in Cirque du Soleil." I was like, "What do you mean?" And then I literally just laughed for like 5 minutes, and he just stared at me till I finished. And it was like, mate, this is like, why is that not really funny? So he was able to deal with me by not joining in with my defence. And I think most people have humour as a defence. A lot of people will use that. And I see it when I do therapy now with people. It's an easy defence to use. And the worst thing a therapist can do is join in with that. But for me at that time, I hated that he never joined in. I hated that he never laughed with me. I hated that he never, had joined in the fun. And that was the best thing he ever did for me, because ultimately I had to then meet myself. I stopped running. I had nowhere to hide anymore. And that was because he consistently didn't allow that behaviour.
So you first phase, you wanted a collaboration, you
Yeah.
wanted the call and answer, you wanted it to be a mutual thing. You then get into attachment, dealing with your own attachment from the past, but also then attaching as part of that to the therapist. And then the therapist helps you through a really, really significant traumatic event in life. Surely, therefore, you want that to carry on forever. Um, how does therapy in that sense come to an end, or how did it come to an end from you?
I am probably not the best example of ending therapy, am I? Like, it took so long for me. I was literally, we set a date to end therapy for like 12 months ahead. That was how attached I was and how much I needed. And then I spent so much time talking about when it's going to end and waiting for the end that I stopped doing the work at certain times as well, because I was in the process of, what are we going to do? How's this ending? And then we eventually did end, and I'm like 17 months out of therapy now. But I would say that it took me a long time to get over leaving, because I couldn't fathom, and this is the other thing that I don't know whether other people with therapy felt the same, but I really, really struggled, not only with what I've already said, which is that he doesn't need me and I need him, but also that it ends. Like, I've spent my whole life where relationships end, like, not in a good way. Like, I haven't spoken to my mum for many years. My dad, I didn't see him for 25 years, and then he's just died this year, hasn't he, in March? And, like, I haven't, seen my sister because she lives with my mum. So I have had like a background of not good endings, and I think many people with attachment issues probably are in a similar situation. So then when you meet someone who helps you work through that, and then you have to end, and the whole goal is to end, it feels like cruel. I used to say to him, this feels cruel. Like, why do we have to end? Why can't we just keep in touch? And that was part of the problem. Like, do you remember, like, the last week? So, like, for my last session, I'd asked him if we could have a party, and he basically said no. I was like, for God's sake, he wouldn't even let me have a party at the end. And I then messaged him. I'd left the session and I'd asked for a party, and he said no. And then I'd messaged him at the end and basically said, I'm not coming next week. You know, I don't really need to come now. Obviously we've said bye. And he basically messaged me and said, well, I think you need to think about that for a few days, because it seems really different to what you were saying about a party. And I had to then apologise again because I'd acted silly. And then I went back and we didn't have a party. That was quite upsetting for me still. Therapy ended, and I was much more bothered. I was the one upset, and I have taken a long time to get over it, haven't I?
Yeah, and running alongside that is the change when you've started training to be a therapist yourself. So taking all that and dragging all those strands together about how you found it difficult at each stage of that therapeutic process. What have you taken as a therapist when you look through the other side of the lens?
Yeah, and I think that's the important thing as well, isn't it? Because the kind of therapy that I've been doing for now, and the kind of clients that I've had are short term, so they have like 8 sessions, and if it's obviously a different type of relationship that I have with them because of the short term nature of it and the lack of attachment to it. But I also understand the importance of the therapeutic relationship, which I wouldn't have understood without being in it, and I wouldn't have understood what that dynamic does for people. So I think for me, I like to bring the relationship into the room straight away with people and just, talk about, what is that like for you in there, and, bringing that kind of attachment in if it was needed. So I feel, and also this is part of why I'm doing this as well for the podcast, because I feel it's important to know who your therapist is as a person, to sort of know about them, but that doesn't belong in the room. That belongs, if you've got curiosities about who the person is you're speaking to every day, who you're being vulnerable with, that's not for the room, but it's still not a secret, it's not hidden, and it's about, the humanness of it first, isn't it, really? And I think the therapeutic relationship, whatever model of therapy you do, whatever, you know, way that goes, it's a human relationship first. And I think when therapy goes well, it's when that's the forefront. Like, we're two people together trying to understand you and understand the way that works. And it doesn't, there's nothing else there. It's connection of humans. And I think that's when the best work is done. And that therapeutic relationship is the key to change. And it certainly was for me, because my therapist was the best therapist I could have had. He basically contained my personality very well, and he was literally just everything I'm not, really, wasn't he? He was very sort of reflective, contained, measured, serious. So it was like, it worked. But yeah, so I've just started throwing that back to you, because obviously, you've known me since I was 21. You've lived with me for 4 years of therapy. You've lived with me for the 17 months after I've left. What was that like for you as the husband of somebody in therapy for so long?
A number of things really. One was interesting. That might sound a weird thing to say. It was very interesting seeing all that you've just talked about now pad out. It was also difficult because you're seeing somebody at times in that you love and care for and everything else in points of distress. And I don't just mean, for example, the obvious one like Matteo being in hospital. I mean, you trying to wrestle with what therapy was, what you were dealing with, the relationship with the therapist, and there was a hell of a lot of talking about you working all that out. And that is, for me as an outsider looking in, part of what therapy is. It's not somebody saying, right, you're here now, you've told me this problem, I'm giving you the answer and off you pop. It's you being, the therapist is saying, this is where I'm taking you, and you go and work it out. So all of that was done in plain sight, really. And then the attachment, as I say, because you're not generally, as a person, an attachment like this is my very best friend, and I need to speak to them every minute of the day. You're not that kind of person. You can be quite reserved emotionally, and that was interesting and possibly difficult at times just to see that dynamic. But then, as again, if it was a 6 week period, I don't think we'd have got all of that. Again, it was 2 years, wasn't it? So it was getting all of those different phases and different dynamics, and then seeing someone coming out the other end. And again, I think I probably saw that the end would have been a long period. It wasn't, I'm going to leave therapy in a week.
Yeah.
That being a long time and continuing, I think this is still not all there. So, yeah, interesting. As I say, it's probably a weird word to use, but it was interesting to watch.
Yeah. But I think that's an important point as well, because it was 4 years in total. Don't forget, have you blocked out two? Because
Did I say two? Was it four? I don't
it's
know.
four
Yeah.
altogether.
2 bits of
But
two.
I feel like that's really a key point that people need to understand, because I've said it to you lots of times. If you were like I was over my therapist and it was a woman, you wouldn't have been able to go for 4 years, because I would have not liked how attached you were. But you had a really good way of understanding that attachment without being jealous or without being, it's a man, why are you attached to him? How, looking back, did you do that? Because a lot of friends and that will say, how was it for Simon? So, especially friends who know me and know that I'm not attached to people. So, in reality, is it as, because you sort of were like, oh, that was fine, but it did feel like you were very fine, but was it really?
Yeah, I think it's different personalities.
Yeah.
I think I'm quite rational, I suppose. I knew it was what it was. I knew it was therapy. It wasn't something else. You weren't going nightclubbing with him or
Yeah.
anything like that. It was, it was what it was. Yeah, it can be difficult, but I think when you see it as what it is, yeah, it can be difficult. I could see why people would struggle with it, but
Yeah.
it was fine for me.
Yeah, which is good. Because if you had have stopped it, yeah, it would have been difficult for me not to have finished.
Yeah.
So yeah. So to end like the same now as like we did last time. So I'll ask you, Simon, what is one thing that you've learned this week?
What I've learnt this week is a bit of a funny one, really. And it came about because an Irish singer got killed last week, called Glenn Hansard. And as a result of that, we watched a film he'd made a decade or so ago called Once. And firstly, I don't know how that film's passed me by, because it seems right up my street, up your street, up our street. And within it, part of it was he was a busker, which Glenn Hansard was himself. And he was playing this guitar that was his, and it had a hole in it. It was all bashed in. And as it turns out, finding out after, that was Glenn's guitar. And two things. First of all, he played it over the years with such passion and soul that he's punched a hole in it effectively. But the sort of the metaphor for that was things that might look broken aren't. And he kept that guitar forever. And at his funeral, people were playing in the cathedral and doing songs on that guitar. And as I understand it, the company has made the guitar, presented him a few years back with a really shiny, spangly, amazing guitar. And he was really great. He was like, thanks for that, but I still prefer this one. And I just love that two things, that soul has created the hole in it, but also, as I say, sometimes we can all feel a bit broken, and we can look at people that might be a bit broken, but they're really not. They might want a bit of help along the way, but there's something in them, just as there was in that guitar, that is wonderful and actually better than the shiny, spangly one. So that's what I've learned. I don't know what that means, but I think that's what I've taken from this week.
No, I think that's a really good one, and I think mine's similar with the film as well, because, again, I agree, I don't know how we'd miss that, but what I really took from it is that, like, obviously, what was the name of the woman in the film as well?
The actress's name's Marta.
Yeah.
I think, I can't pronounce her surname because it's Czech, so my Czech is next to 0, so...
Yeah, so her, and when you told me that they'd got together after the film, I actually loved that, because, so I've learned that, like, human connection again, when it's, you wouldn't have necessarily seen them together at the beginning, but when you saw them singing together, when you saw them writing songs together, and I just love that human connection happens, and then didn't she sing the song at his funeral?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think as well, it was just the fact there were so many things in the film, like he was on a motorbike and didn't have a motorbike accident. It was just the kind of foreboding of the film for me. It was like pretty, life again, isn't it? It's like, unpredictable, but predictable in its unpredictableness.
And the bashed in guitar outlived him.
Yeah. So just faith in human connections, I think, from that.